Neighbor was stealing water from my supply, so I ruined him. The air in my new house smelled of dust and opportunity. A fixer-upper in the heart of the capital city. Bought dirt cheap from family friends desperate for cash. They'd fled the country 3 years ago, leaving mid-renovation, with only a rusty padlock securing the front door. No gate, no boundaries, just a wide-open invitation for anyone to waltz in. I moved in at the start of the month, my 3 dogs bounding through the cracked tiles, their barks echoing off unfinished walls. But the neighborhood greeted me with a warning. A stranger's bike parked brazenly in my garage. I dragged it to the street, the metal frame scraping the pavement, and by noon, a wrought iron gate was up, my first act of claiming this place. That evening, an angry man pounded on the bars, his face red as the city's sunset. I watched through my window, curtains twitching, as he cursed for 15 minutes before slinking away with his bike. Welcome to the neighborhood, I thought, already sour on the place. A no parking sign fixed a constant stream of cars blocking my gate, but the unease lingered like the humidity that clung to my skin. Then came the shower. The water trickled weakly, barely enough to rinse the soap from my shoulders. Outside, the neighbor's water pump hummed a low, greedy growl from the 3-story house next door. The old man who lived there, Mr. Khan, was a retired mechanic with a scowl as permanent as the city's smog. He'd been livid when my friends sold me the house, ranting about outsiders ruining his quiet street. My friends warned me he was trouble, but at 6 feet tall with 3 protective dogs, I wasn't worried. Still, that pump's drone sat my nerves on edge. In our city, water pressure from the public supply is too weak to reach rooftop tanks without a pump. Khan's house, with tenants on the upper 2 floors, relied on one to keep water flowing. I waited until his pump shut off, then turned on my kitchen tap. The water gushed, strong and steady. Suspicion coiled in my gut. For 3 years, this house had sat empty, yet the water bills had crept higher than the leaks could explain. Khan, I realized,
大家好，我是
I'd been
你们的
helping
老
himself
朋
to
友
my
佛缘
supply,
居士。关于
siphoning
如
water
何用
like
电脑玩
a
这款游
knife.
戏，大家可以
I
看
couldn't
我
hit
视
from
频
the
下方的
exact
课
height
程
of
讲
tap
解。
probably buried somewhere in the tangle of plumbing between our properties, but the pattern was clear. Every time his pump ran, my pressure dropped. Water here is cheap. My bill, even with washing 3 dogs, a car, and a garden, was barely $5 a month. But this wasn't about money. It was about Khan's entitlement. His smug belief that he could steal from me because the house had been abandoned. He'd waltzed onto my property, rigged my pipes, and thought he'd get away with it. That arrogance burned hotter than the city sun. I weighed my options for days, pacing the creaky floors as my dogs watched, their ears pricked. Confront him? He'd deny it. Maybe get hostile. Go legal? Too slow. And the fines wouldn't sting. Enough. Let it slide? No, every time I turned on a tap, I'd feel his invisible hands taking what was mine. I wanted him to learn a lesson, one he'd never forget. The plan was simple, elegant, and perfectly legal. I turned off my water at the mains when his pump was running. No need to trespass. The law's broken, just a flick of a valve to flip the script. Household tanks here use a ball valve to detect water levels, signaling the pump to run until the tank fills. If the water stops, the pump keeps churning, desperate for something to pull. Starve a pump long enough, and it burns out. A mechanical heart attack on Monday. As Khan's pump kicked on with its familiar growl, I slipped outside to the main valve, hidden behind an overgrown jasmine bush. The metal was cool under my fingers. As I turned it off, the flow dying with a soft gurgle. I leaned against the wall, listening to the pump's futile hum, a smirk tugging at my lips. I expected it to overheat, maybe cost Khan a few $100 to replace. I didn't expect it to take down his entire house. BYM. Shouts woke me. Flashlights bobbed outside Khan's place, tenants arguing in hushed, then furious tones. No water. No power, what the hell is this? One yelled. The pump, running dry all night, had overloaded the house's ancient wiring, 1990's relics that couldn't handle the strain. Fuses blew, circuits fried, and the whole building went dark. My dogs stirred, but I stayed still, peering through the blinds, heart pounding with a mix of guilt and triumph. In our country, tenant laws are ironclad. Water and power are sacred, and landlords must keep them flowing. Khan's failure was a legal landmine. By morning, one tenant had packed up, tires screeching as they left. The other filed a police complaint, joined soon by the second. The police, empowered to fine without a court order, slapped Khan with a $500 penalty, a fortune here, where a mechanic's pension barely covers rise and rent. He had to refund both tenants' security deposits and couldn't pay rent until the wiring and water were fixed, a repair bill that would gut his savings. 2 days later, Khan stood at my gate, his face gaunt, eyes sunken like the city's potholes. "Did you turn off your water?" he asked. voice tight. I leaned casually against the gate, my dogs growling softly behind me. Yeah, had a pipe leak. I lied, smooth as the jasmine scent. Plumber fixed it yesterday. His jaw twitched, but he just nodded. Okay, he muttered, shuffling back to his darkened house. He knew I knew, but he was powerless. Checkmate.byc. Khan was moving out, defeated, to live with his daughter, his tenants, his income, his pride all gone because he thought he could steal from me. Next week, a plumber will rip out any pipes crossing my property line, sealing off his access for good. I didn't just fix my water problem. I sent a message. This house, this water, this life, it's mine. But late at night, when the dogs are asleep and the city comes outside, I wonder about Khan, a retired mechanic, alone, now dependent on a daughter he barely mentioned. Did he steal out of greed or desperation? Did he know the chaos his actions would unleash? I pushed the thoughts away. He made his choice when he tapped my pipes. I made mine when I turned the valve. 2 birds, 1 stone, in a neighborhood that knows not to mess with the new guy on the block. Shattered bonds, unbroken spirit. My fight to end a family's trafficking legacy at 16. The air in our kitchen smelled of burnt toast and betrayal the morning grandmother Veda pulled out her tape measure. I was 16, crunching on Lucky Charms, when she wrapped the cold, stiff tape around my hips, her fingers brushing my skin like a spider's legs. 34 inches, she declared, scribbling in her leather notebook as if cataloging livestock. Perfect breeding proportions. My spoon froze mid-bite, milk dripping onto the table. I glanced at Mom, expecting outrage, but she just stared into her coffee, her eyes hollow as if she'd already surrendered. What's happening? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. The silence was heavier than the cereal bowl in my hands. For 3 months, strange men had been slinking into our house, their eyes crawling over me like I was a prize horse at auction. Grandmother called them business associates, but their stares left a greasy film on my skin. They'd sip tea in her parlor, their voices low and clipped, while she paraded me around in dresses I didn't choose. I was Esperanza Morales Essie. To everyone but the documents that would unravel my world, the truth hit like a punch to the gut when I found the filing cabinet. I'd been searching for my birth certificate in grandmother's study, a room that always smelled of lavender and lies. The cabinet's lock was broken, and inside were folders labeled with girls' names, ages, and what looked like invoices. My hands trembled as I pulled out the one marked Esperanza, age 16. Inside were medical records I'd never consented to, confirmation of my virginity, fertility assessments, dental x-rays, photos of me at school, at the park, unaware of the camera. And worst of all, a contract between grandmother and a man named Dmitry Klov for $45,000. My delivery date was March 15th, next week. I gagged, the room spinning as I realized I wasn't just being married off. I was being sold. There were 17 other girls' files. Some names I knew from school: Maria, Sophia, Carmen. Others were strangers with notes like delivered to declant or payment complete. One file stopped my heart. Luna, age 14, her photo stamped with a red deceased. My stomach lurched, and I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. This wasn't just about me. Grandmother was running a human trafficking ring. That night, I faked food poisoning, locked myself in my room, and photographed every document with my phone, the flash casting eerie shadows on the walls. The next morning, over pancakes, grandmother announced my wedding to the family. Essie's moving to Eastern Europe next week, she said, her voice as casual as if she were discussing the weather. She's marrying a successful businessman who'll provide for her. My father's fork clattered against his plate. Since when? He asked, confusion creasing his face. Since it was decided, grandmother snapped, her eyes like daggers. I excused myself, heart pounding, and called my cousin Ricardo, a criminal justice major. I sent him the photos. His text came back instantly. Holy shit, Essie. This is human trafficking. Call the FBI now. But I couldn't. Not yet. That afternoon, I overheard grandmother on the phone, coordinating the movement of other girls that week. This was bigger than me, and I needed more proof. For 3 days, I turned spy in my own home. I hid a recorder under the parlor table, capturing grandmother's deals in her cold, clipped tone. I snapped photos of visitors' license plates through the blinds, my hands shaking so badly I could barely focus the camera. I documented every detail: bank transfers, coded emails, names of buyers. The breaking point came when I heard her plan to drug me. She's asking too many questions, she told someone on the phone, her voice low and venomous. Put the sedative in her orange juice. She'll sleep until Prague. I was cargo, not a bride. That night, I compiled a digital evidence package: photos, recordings, financial records, and uploaded it to a secure cloud drive. I drafted emails to the FBI, local police, and every major news outlet I could think of. But I had one last move: a tea. My farewell breakfast. The dining room smelled of syrup and dread. Mom's eyes were red from crying. Dad looked lost, his hands fidgeting with his napkin. My little brother Diego, only 12, kept asking why I had to leave. Grandmother raised her orange juice in a toast to new beginnings. I stood, my legs trembling but my voice steady. Before we toast, I said, pulling out my phone, I have something to share. I hit play on a recording of grandmother negotiating my sale price 45. Low for the Morales girl. The room froze. Dad's whisper cut through the silence. You sick bitch. Grandmother lunged for my phone, but I was faster. Too late, I said, hitting send on 18 emails. The FBI's on their way. Her face twisted into a snarl. You stupid girl, she hissed. You have no idea how deep this goes. Your precious family's on the list. Your mother agreed. Your father signed the papers. I turned to my parents, my voice cracking. What's she talking about? Mom's hands shook around her coffee mug. We owed money, she whispered. Your father's gambling debts. They said this was the only way. Dad stood, knocking over his chair. Veda said it was just a marriage. He shouted, a rich husband, a good life. Grandmother's laugh was a blade. You think these men want wives? They buy slaves. Half these girls are dead within a year. The front door exploded open. FBI. Everyone on the ground. Agents in tactical gear flooded the room, weapons drawn. Grandmother stuffed papers in her mouth, chewing frantically. Mom collapsed, sobbing on the linoleum. Dad was cuffed, his face a mask of shock. Agent Patricia Torres found me behind an overturned chair, clutching my phone. Esperanza Morales? She asked, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. I nodded. You're safe now, honey. Your evidence was incredible. We've been tracking this network for 8 months, but you gave us the key. In a sterile FBI conference room, I learned the scope of grandmother's operation. Her Blessed Union's cultural marriage services was a front for a trafficking ring spanning 3 continents. For 15 years, she targeted Latino families in financial distress, using church connections to build trust, then convincing parents to marry off their daughters for debt forgiveness. The girls vanished. Luna, the 14-year-old I thought was dead, had died escaping a Moldovan brothel. 17 others were unaccounted for, their families receiving fake letters about their happy married lives. The financial records I'd photographed showed $1.2 million in transactions, with girls sold for $25,000 to $65,000 based on age and physical traits. Surveillance photos showed grandmother meeting men in suits, exchanging briefcases, boarding private jets with terrified girls. Your evidence exposed the whole iceberg, Agent Torres said. My parents' interrogations revealed more horrors. Dad's gambling addiction had racked up $47,000 in debt. Grandmother offered to clear it by selling me, spinning tales of European princes. Mom admitted she suspected something was wrong when Rosa Ramirez, 15, vanished after her wedding in Romania. The letters Rosa's family received didn't sound like her, but grandmother had excuses: cultural adjustment, new language, busy lifestyle. Rosa was killed escaping a Bucharest compound. The raids came 3 days later, hitting 12 locations across 4 states. They arrested grandmother fleeing to Mexico with suitcases of cash and fake IDs. Dmitry Klov, actually Victor Petrov, an Interpol most wanted trafficker, was caught in a Phoenix hotel with plans to ship 4 girls overseas. A Tucson warehouse, disguised as a shipping business, held 4 girls: Carmen, 17, emaciated and drugged; Sofia, 15, days from being shipped to Ukraine; Isabella, 16, still fighting; and Arya, 14, believing she'd been adopted for a better life. All were rescued. The media called it the largest trafficking bust in state history. CNN interviewed me from an FBI safe house. Why document everything instead of running? Anderson Cooper asked. Luna, I whispered. She was 14 when they killed her. I couldn't let more girls become her. My family disintegrated. Dad got 18 months in prison after a plea deal. Mom avoided jail with probation and community service but spiraled into agoraphobia and alcoholism. Diego moved to Denver with Aunt Carmen, carrying the shame of our family's actions. Why'd you tell? He asked once, his voice small. Now everyone knows what we did. Grandmother's trial was a media circus. She showed no remorse, claiming she gave girls better lives. The judge sentenced her to life without parole plus 300 years, calling her a dangerous predator. I testified, staring into her hate-filled eyes, seeing fear there for the first time. 6 months after the trial, I testified before Congress. The Esperanza Act passed unanimously, mandating background checks for marriage brokers, harsher penalties for family trafficking, and funding for survivor services. It was signed into law on Luna's 18th birthday. The Phoenix sisters Carmen, Sofia, Isabella, Arya, and I meet monthly. Carmen studying nutrition to help trauma survivors. Sofia's pursuing international law. Isabella teaches self-defense to at-risk girls. Arya, still healing, struggles with trust but is alive. We're survivors, bound by shared fire. Then came the call that changed everything. Agent Torres found grandmother's real records in a safety deposit box, detailed notes on every girl, trafficked over 20 years. Luna, marked deceased, was alive in Bulgaria, forced into prostitution but rescued after a raid triggered by my evidence. On a video call, her scarred arms and shaved head couldn't dim the fire in her eyes. "You saved my life," she said. 2 others, Maria and Yuki, were also freed. 12 families backed out of trafficking deals after my story broke. I'm 19 now, at Georgetown on a full scholarship, studying international law and psychology to fight trafficking globally. My dorm walls are covered with photos of the Phoenix sisters, reminders of why I fought. Letters from escaped girls Texas, California, Florida show my case saved them. Dr. Patricia Morrison wrote that the Esperanza Protocol, inspired by my evidence, is now standard in trafficking investigations. Even Viktor Petrov, the man who was to buy me, wrote from prison. "You destroyed a monster," he said, sharing details that led to more arrests. Grandmother died in her cell, her last words accusing me of destroying our family. But Diego's thriving. The Phoenix sisters are rebuilding. 50 potential victims were spared. The laws are changing. She was 9 when she asked why we save those who cannot save themselves. I was 16 when her curiosity became lethal, first a poisoned cat, then a terrified neighbor, and finally a plastic bag on our living room couch, hiding a truth I was desperate to expose. My 9-year-old sister, Emma, looked up from her homework one evening and asked me with startling calm, "Why do we help people who can help themselves?" I was 16, headphones in, buried in sat prep and teenage trivialities. "Because that's what good people do, Emma," I muttered before drifting back into my music. She closed her notebook with a slow, deliberate snap. I should have noticed the curl of her lip, the faint shadow behind her eyes. The first real alarm came during dinner a few nights later. Emma pointed to a classmate who'd burst into tears in gym, cataloging his weakness in her notebook. I laughed it off as weird kid stuff. But then Mr. Pinelli came to our door holding Patch, his tabby, and I saw the truth. Patch's fur was bare in places, his eyes bloodred, tongue an unnatural blue. Mr. Pinelli gasped as he showed me security footage of Emma slipping something into the cat's bowl in our back garden. My heart jumped then plummeted when Emma met my gaze, an unreadable smirk on her face. Emma's rare form of autism, our parents would later tell anyone who asked, was hard to manage. I swallowed my horror, handed Mr. Pinelli $300, and closed the door on the gasping cat and my own guilt. "What the actual?" Emma blurted, eyes bright. "It was old as hell. I just wanted to see what happened. That was my turning point." With Dad gone and Mom working 16-hour shifts at the hospital, I became Emma's de facto guardian. I emptied my savings at Barnes & Noble, devouring every book on conduct disorders until I felt qualified to be the next Mary Poppins. Our first big talk was not about puberty or trust, but about empathy and the simple care owed to every living creature. Emma listened, tilting her head like a curious caged bird. When she asked, if natural selection is real, why do we keep the defective ones around? I felt ice run down my spine. The word defective scraped against my conscience. But I pressed on, because I was her only shot at learning right from wrong. I enrolled her in therapy with a specialist, signed her up for softball to teach teamwork, and dragged her more obviously than not to volunteer at the animal shelter. For months, reports came back clean. Teachers said she was engaged. The therapist said she was cooperative. I almost believed it. Then the call from Mrs. Perth shattered my relief. Our tiny therapy hamster, stashed in Emma's backpack, bore syringe marks, and Emma's neat handwriting catalogued every squeak and struggle. My chest tightened as I thanked the stunt support group leader and hung up. I fought the wave of panic and convinced myself Mrs. Perth was mistaken. That evening, I confronted Emma. She wept real tears and insisted, "She's been targeting me. Check the hamster. You'll see nothing." The cage was pristine. No punctures, no notebook. I believed her. And then she said it, her smile infectious, her eyes softening in a way only a teenage crush could explain. I made a friend. A real one. She showed me Charlie, skinny, glasses slipping down his nose, an anxious freshman who beamed when Emma spoke. I gave her space, cleaning dishes while they ate pasta. Then I heard the thud.by the time I lunged across the room, Emma's full weight pressed down on Charlie's chest, a clear plastic bag sealing his fate. His body went limp, his eyes glazed. He did not struggle. She watched him collapse as calmly as she'd assessed a broken toy, then stepped aside to wash up. I screamed for her to call 911. She raised her eyebrow at me, her motions deliberate and controlled, as though staging a scene. When I finally got the dispatcher on the line, Emma was already smoothing Charlie's hair, arranging his glasses, propping a throw pillow under his head. She crouched beside him, practicing grief. First confusion, then shock, finally perfect devastation. By the time the paramedics and police arrived, Emma had composed a flawless performance. As they pulled me away, my arm still miming spar, she gave her statement in trembling voice, eyes unfocused. tears streaming down her cheeks. I left my heart on that couch. Emma left her mark on everyone else. The sirens had barely receded when two paramedics gently but firmly pulled me away from Charlie's side. My hand still hovered over his motionless chest, muscles locked in the rhythm of CPR they no longer needed. Emma sat cross-legged on the couch, perfectly composed apart from the single tear tracing a clean line down her cheek. She watched me struggle. Her lips quirked in a mock sympathetic smile. A younger officer edged her away toward the living room doorway while an older detective guided me into the kitchen. The veteran looked grave as he asked me to start from the beginning. I spoke with surprising steadiness. How Emma had invited Charlie over, how I had cooked pasta, how I'd stepped away for dishes. I saved the worst to feel of that plastic bag tightening around the boy's throat from the first telling, waiting for the moment I could see honest shock in his face. It never came. Through the crack in the door, I caught Emma gesturing to the younger officer, wiping tears from her cheeks as she described Charlie's sudden collapse. She pulled out her phone to show photos of the two of them laughing earlier in the evening, proof, she said, of nothing sinister. Then she frowned in sympathy as Mr. Pinelli's replacement cat meowed in the hallway, distraught after fleeing our overrun floor. Emma knelt to coax it back inside, her tone gentle. I just fed him. I hope he comes back. Each movement was a note in her silent symphony of control. Back in the kitchen, Detective Chen questioned me about cameras. I swallowed, my laptop perched on the coffee table still running motion detect software. Before I could answer, Emma's voice broke through the archway. He's always filming me, she accused, pointing at the laptop. It made me uncomfortable. Simple lies, delivered so convincingly they dripped credibility. The detective nodded and motioned to have my laptop bagged for analysis, an easy victory in Emma's carefully staged campaign. My phone buzzed. One text after another, Emma's message firestormed to our aunts, our grandmother, Mom's best friend. Something awful happened. I am so scared. Please pray for me. By the time I glanced at the texts, the narrative had already shifted. Emma, the terrified child. Me, the obsessive sibling. Every relative responded with love for Emma's trauma, sprinkled with anxious concern for you too, sis. Mom arrived in her scrubs, clutching hospital-worn fatigue and disbelief. Emma sprang into her arms, collapsing in a perfect sob. I tried to save him, but he just stopped breathing and Mom held her like a newborn. I stood at the threshold, ghost-white, unable to interrupt the tableau. Behind us, the cat yowled again, a small casualty in a night overflowing with tragedy. Emma volunteered to take care of it, vanishing into the backyard where, she later reported, the cat had escaped through the commotion. Another lie, another blemish erased. The living room became a stage. Charlie's parents arrived, crashing through the door in anguish and rage. Emma moved among them, her voice trembling as she recounted a terrifying evening. She produced the same photos she'd shown the officer, the same frantic texts. Any question aimed at me was deflected with tears and trembling words. My own protest, a choked explanation about software, cameras, evidence sounded desperate, unstable. By 10 o'clock p.m., Killed Protective Services agents stepped in, demanding records, therapy reports, school files. They interviewed Emma in the living room under Mrs. Perth's watchful eye. They quizzed me in the kitchen about the poisoned cat and the terror hamster. I answered honestly, detailing every mistake, my barnstorming through Barnes and Noble, the softball sign-up, the volunteer shifts. But no one wanted to know I had tried. Emma's tears and grief were the only currency that carried weight. The crowd thinned at dawn. Paramedics, police, CPS, neighbors murmuring on the front porch. Emma had woven her story into every witness's mind. I sank onto the couch, staring at the spot where Charlie had died. The carpet blotched gray and red, as unremarkable as the first poisoned cat's fur stains. Emma's performance had already written the script. Unstable older sister, creepy obsession, tragic accident, and no one but me knew how meticulously she had choreographed every moment. Early the next morning, I found myself in a sterile interrogation room. At the police station, bright fluorescent lights humming overhead. Detective Chen slid a printed screenshot across the metal table, a Ring doorbell timestamp showing me arriving at home at 5:47 p.m., and Emma walking up with Charlie at 6:15 p.m. He asked why I had been home alone for nearly half an hour before her date. My throat tightened. I explained I had been in the kitchen checking on dinner and forgotten to close the back door properly. Each word sounded hollow. He leaned forward and asked about the laptop cameras. I told him they were part of my remote work setup, motion detect software to guard against break-ins. Emma's accusation that I had been secretly filming her had already been logged, and now my own testimony felt like an admission of creepy obsession. While I spoke, a forensics team wheeled my laptop out through a side door. Emma had engineered its seizure before I could delete anything. When I mentioned Grandma's inconsistent account, her insisting I was at work the day Charlie died when I was actually home, Detective Chen nodded knowingly. He said Emma's lawyer had highlighted those contradictions to argue that my Statements could not be trusted. I glanced out the window, watching a family member arrive to give Emma moral support. In that moment, I felt entirely alone. After 2 hours, the interrogation wound down. Chen told me they would need to review therapy records, support group notes, and school files. I realized that every resource I had gathered, texts, journal entries, photos, was already in Emma's hands, weaponized to paint me as the dangerous one. He stood, motioning me to follow him out. As I passed the lobby, people whispered, "That is his sister. Poor child. What a tragedy." Emma's narrative had become the only truth they could see. I left the station into the midday sun, shoulders heavy with dread. My phone lit up with messages from friends and former co-workers, all expressing sympathy for Emma and concern for my mental health. No one reached out to ask how I was holding up. I walked a few blocks home in a daze, rehearsing the next steps in my mind. Obtaining the Johnsons' doorbell footage, tracking down Mrs. Perth to testify, retrieving Charlie's phone backup from the cloud. Each plan felt like scaling a mountain in sneakers. That evening, I sat in the ruins of our living room, the carpet still bearing dark stains. I opened my shared Google Drive to download every photo and document Emma might have missed. Our childhood. Snapshots, her early notebooks cataloging stimuli, my old essays about family stress. With each file saved, I felt a flicker of hope. Charlie's evidence still existed, and if I could present it with precision, maybe the world would finally see Emma for who she truly was and not the scared, grieving child she'd so brilliantly portrayed. For 28 years I was the family ghost, overshadowed at every gathering, praised no higher than furniture, until one reading of my grandmother's will made me the richest person in the room, and suddenly they all came crawling back. I hovered at the edge of every family dinner, a silent observer in the corner. My cousins earned applause for modest promotions: assistant manager at a coffee shop, a medical residency, a junior partnership. Meanwhile, I could cure diseases in my lab coat, yet they asked me when I would get a real job. Aunt Veronica would step around me to embrace the person behind me. Uncle Randall would introduce his children to strangers and forget I existed, even as I stood 3 feet away clutching an expensive bottle of wine, my silent proof that I cared enough to invest. They dismissed me as Quinn's face after I left law school to found CloudSync Solutions. In their eyes, I had traded a suit and tie for playing with computers. They did not see the 7-figure contracts I signed or the 15 people I employed. When I shared a graduation photo announcing my master's degree in computer science and a 4.0 GPA, the family group chat fell silent for 3 days. Yet when Kusinfin landed a 12-hour coffee shop gig, for Tai7 congratulations and a gold watch rushed in. I stopped trying to fit their narrative long before they learned my name. At weddings I was the hired photographer, asked to step aside so they could capture family-only photos. At Christmas I sat at the kids' table beside toddlers and high chairs, despite being 28. Every holiday felt like a reminder that my achievements meant nothing. And still I showed up, hope knotted in my stomach that maybe this time they would notice me. They never did, until Grandmother Riris summoned me alone to her care home. Each Tuesday at Sunset Manor I carried her homemade Kokalatekip cookies, a recipe she taught me when I was 12. The nurses greeted me by name. I was Quinn, Mrs. Patterson's grandson. Later, in her private room, we would play chess while she recalled building her construction empire from a single pickup truck. She asked follow-up questions about my business strategies, questions my own parents never bothered to learn. "You remind me of myself," she said, capturing my bishop with a knight so precise it felt like a small miracle. When Grandmaris passed, I received a group text. "Mom passed this afternoon. Funeral arrangements TBD. No phone call, no warmth, just logistics." At the reading of her $20 million estate, I sat quietly in the back corner as vultures circled the mahogany conference table. They assumed a 12-way split. Then attorney Morrison read her final will: disappointment for Veronica, sadness for Randall, and for every grandchild the neglect they had shown. To me, the devoted visitor, she left everything. I stepped out of that office with the keys to a mansion, a business, and investment portfolios worth millions, along with letters exposing my family's darkest secrets. Their shocked faces fueled me as they scrambled for a share of my inheritance. But I understood finally. Presence is earned, not demanded. That very afternoon, my phone lit up like Times Square. Group texts, voicemails, lawyer solicitations, everyone jockeying for a piece of what they'd assumed would be theirs. Aunt Veronica begged for reconciliation. Uncle Randall offered brotherly support. Even Cousin Theo, now drifting back home, insisted on celebratory drinks. Each message dripped with the sudden warmth of people who'd spent half their lives treating me like a ghost. When Aunt Veronica invited me to dinner at Randall's house, family must stick together, she wrote, I almost stayed away. But I wanted to see the horror on their faces when they realized their pilgrimage to the head of the table was for nothing more than another performance. I arrived to find every seat filled, each face bright with expectancy. Veronica practically Purred when she showed me to the very chair I'd long ago been deemed too old for, the patriarch's seat. They unfurled their family trust plan like a red carpet. Share the business, pool the investments, merge the assets. Their voices were soothing, rehearsed until I stood, cleared my throat, and pulled up my phone. Before we rearranged Grandma's fortune, I said, "Would you care to hear how you spoke of me when you thought I wasn't listening?" I pressed play. The room went icy. Veronica's own words filled the air. "He's just so awkward. Playing with computers." Uncle Randall's voice chimed in. "Manual labor might teach him some humility." Even Ava's confession to her sorority how including me in photos would hurt her image cracked through the speakers. Their faces drained of color as each recording stripped away their carefully crafted masks. No one spoke. I dropped the phone into Veronica's trembling hands. "You gave me invisibility for 28 years, I said softly. "I'm returning." "Exactly what you offered." "Nothing." I turned and walked out. The silence that followed louder than any protest. They tried every tactic next: elder abuse claims, undue influence lawsuits, but the 6 years of Sunset Minor videos, nurse testimonies about my Tuesday visits, and Grandmaris's own written explanations left no foothold for their appeals. Within months, the fallout was brutal. Veronica's home went to foreclosure. Randall's restaurant shuttered under a pile of debt. Theo's engagement dissolved, and Ava found herself juggling 3 jobs to pay off credit card bills she'd reckoned on my inheritance to cover. My parents, finally desperate, showed up at my office with tearful speeches about family and forgiveness. I listened politely, then slipped them a check for $500, exactly what my birthday's gifts had totaled over the past decade. "Consider us even," I told them, and watched their confusion ripple into shame. Ava was the only one who reached out again, unguarded. 6 months later, no lawyers, no financial schemes, just an apology that shook me with its honesty. Over coffee, she admitted the jealousy, the regrets, the nights she'd cried thinking of how she'd treated me. I listened, offered what grace I could, and the next year she stood beside me as maid of honor at my wedding. No mention of money, only genuine pride. Today, I'm running CloudSync Solutions and a nonprofit in Grandma Iris's name that brings tech education to underserved kids. The old mansion is now the Iris Patterson Community Center, where every voice matters. The construction business she built continues under professional management. I sometimes wonder if I should have shared more, forgiven sooner. Then I remember those Tuesday evenings with Iris, when her greatest wish was simply that her family would remember she existed. Some things can't be bought, and some presences have to be earned. After 28 years of invisibility, I learned that my worth wasn't defined by blood or tradition but by the courage to claim it. The black sheep doesn't always stay in the herd. Sometimes it finds a better flock. Sometimes it starts its own. My sister's boyfriend saved me from being abducted. My family thanked you by getting fired, evicted, and doxed. When I asked Mom why, she simply smirked and said, "Imagine explaining that to your child." Mom had Googled my sister's new boyfriend, Jerome, before he'd even stepped inside our home. Arrested, assault charges, gang affiliation, all before 19. She announced it like a weather report while he stood in our doorway, waiting to be invited in. He was from Riverside, the part of town the news warned us not to go to after dark. Uncle Brendan ran a background check. Mom changed our locks that same night. Dad's friends started dropping by daily, casually mentioning their weapons collections whenever Jerome visited. They made him eat on the porch while we had dinner inside. I watched him through the window, still saying grace over his cold food. Jerome carried 2 wallets, one with his money, one to hand over if he got robbed. He called it the Riverside tax. He texted someone before entering our neighborhood and kept his location on constantly. Never complained when Mom made my sister sit across the room from him. Never flinched when Dad's golf buddies asked if she felt safe. He worked 3 jobs, fixed our fence while we slept, brought groceries nobody asked for. Every Friday, I watched him hand an envelope to someone at the bus stop. I assumed it was drug money. Everyone did until Jeffrey happened. My ex had been harassing me since. I ghosted him that Tuesday. He and 3 friends cornered me after school. "Nobody disrespects me," he sneered, dragging me toward his car. Jerome appeared from nowhere. "Let them go, Jeff." Jeff laughed. "Who's going to make me?" Jerome pulled out his phone. "Your cousin Ray runs the youth program at Riverside Community Center. We went through it together." He dialed. "Ray?" "Yeah, it's Jerome. Your nephew's here making some bad choices." Jeff's crew vanished just like that. My parents exploded. Gang connections. He threatened children. They filed complaints with all 3 of his employers. Dad's friend, a police captain, had Jerome pulled over 4 times that week, each stop matching a suspect description. They forced my sister to dump him publicly in the school cafeteria. She sobbed while he just nodded and walked away. The job losses came fast. First the warehouse, "We can't have criminals here," they said. Then the restaurant, parents threatened boycotts. Finally, the cleaning company. Insurance won't cover high-risk employees. I found him volunteering at the food bank, serving others and taking nothing. When I approached, he tried to smile. Your sister deserves better anyway. Why don't you defend yourself? That's when he cracked. What's there to defend? I have a record. That's true. I'm from Riverside. Can't change that. But why was I arrested? He looked away. My little brother was 12. Some older kids paid him to sell candy bars at school. The money turned out to be marked bills from a robbery. When cops came, his voice broke. You know what juvie does to kids like him? Small, sensitive. He wouldn't have survived a week. I understood what he meant, so he took the blame. I was 15. Big for my age. I could handle it. He stood. Your parents aren't wrong. She deserves someone without baggage. I found my sister that night clutching a small box. Inside was a picture of an engagement ring. On the back, his calculations. Exactly how many overtime shifts it would take to afford it. 247 shifts. He'd crossed off 246. At the bottom, he'd written, for when you graduate, with little hearts, the Friday envelopes, payment installments to the jeweler. Those gang tattoos everyone whispered about. His brother's birthday. In Roman numerals. The scars on his knuckles weren't from fighting, they were from the factory job he worked nights. Mom found us crying together. For the first time since Jerome entered our lives, she looked uncertain. What did we do? My sister asked. Mom's silence was deafening. Jerome disappeared. His cousin Ray told us he moved to Chicago, taking a job with a youth program. He said he needed to go where his past couldn't hurt anyone else's future, especially anyone he loved. His last text to my sister. Your family's right. My love isn't enough when it costs you everything. My sister wears that ring on a chain now. Mom no longer tells her to remove it. Sometimes I catch her staring at it with tears in her eyes. I know she's thinking about how good people can look dangerous when you're determined to see them that way. Our prejudice is so strong that people forget to look closer until it's too late. Jerome saved me from being kidnapped. We responded by taking everything from him. It wasn't long before I realized we both deserved a better future, one where we could be with whoever we wanted. That night, I sat at my laptop for 3 hours, cursor blinking over the upload button. My hands shook as I watched the progress bar inch forward. The video expos I'd spent weeks compiling contained everything. Screenshots of Dad's friends' messages, recordings of Mom's book club meetings, documentation of every job Jerome lost because of our family's campaign. My sister slept. In the next room, Jerome's ring box clutched against her chest like a lifeline. The upload finished at 2:47 a.m. I tagged it with every relevant hashtag I could think of, then collapsed into bed, certain the world would finally see what we'd done. 3 weeks crawled by. The view counter stuck at 47. 2 comments appeared, one calling me dramatic, another suggesting I needed therapy for my white guilt. Meanwhile, Mom hosted her Thursday book club as if nothing had changed. I pressed my ear against the thin wall, recording their conversation on my phone. The women praised Mom for protecting family values. One mentioned how brave she'd been to stand up to that Riverside boy. Another shared a story about her daughter's ex-boyfriend from the wrong side of town. They toasted with wine, celebrating their successful gatekeeping. I checked on my sister every few hours. She hadn't left her room in 5 days, surviving on crackers. I slipped under her door and found her hunched over her desk, pen in hand. The words on the paper made my blood freeze. She'd been searching painless ways to die. When I finally used the spare key, I swept through her room, gathering every med bottle and sharp object. She didn't look up, just kept writing that horrible letter. The next afternoon, Carol's dad's business partner's wife stood on our porch with a casserole with a concerned smile. I watched from the stairs as she cornered Mom in the kitchen, her voice carrying clearly, I have a friend who can check if that boy's really in Chicago or if he's stalking us. Mom's eyes lit up with interest. My phone buzzed. A notification from the neighborhood group chat. Carol's daughter, Crystal, had screenshot my video and shared it with her friends. The messages underneath made me sick. They mocked my white girl, tears over a thug boyfriend. Crystal added that her mom said he probably had other girlfriends in Riverside anyway. At 3 o'clock a.m., I heard the crashing sounds. My sister stood in her bathroom, phone in pieces on the floor. 7 years of bad luck, she whispered, staring at the shattered mirror, blood dripping from her knuckles. I ran into Carol at the pharmacy while buying bandages. She chatted with the pharmacist about certain people invading their neighborhoods, gesturing broadly while a black customer stood right behind her. The man's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Carol's voice grew louder, as if daring him to respond. Mom mentioned Carol's offer at dinner. Her brother-in-law, the police captain, could verify Jerome's location in Chicago, just to make sure he really moved away, she said. Dad stayed silent, pushing food around his plate. I wanted to scream that we'd already destroyed him, but the words stuck in my throat. My video suddenly jumped to 2,000 views. Someone had shared it in a Chicago community group. Comments split between support and accusations of white savior. Complex. People argue about whether I had any right to tell Jerome's story, whether my family's racism was my story to expose. Then Ray texted me. His message was brief but devastating. Jerome had seen the video. He wasn't happy I'd involved myself. I should delete it before it caused him more problems. My attempt to help was hurting him all over again. My sister found my hidden folder while I was at school. She confronted me that evening, holding printouts of Carol's Facebook posts about neighborhood safety, carefully worded warnings about keeping outsiders away. Mom burst into my room the next morning, demanding I delete the video immediately. She let slip that Carol had helped write those complaint letters to Jerome's employers. She knew exactly what words would work. 2 months passed. My sister started dating Adam, Mom's co-worker's son. He was everything our parents wanted. White, from a good family. She wore Jerome's ring hidden under her collar. At a family dinner, Adam joked, "She really upgraded from the charity case." Nobody laughed, but nobody corrected him either. I spent hours digging through internet archives and discovered Carol's file on the maintenance worker who'd assaulted her daughter 2 years ago. Charges had been dropped, lack of evidence. The description eerily matched Jerome. Carol covered it up to avoid scandal, paying for therapy and transferring Crystal to private schools. Carol was running this as a twisted hobby, documenting threats, tracking license plates, wielding blackmail. The pattern repeated different charges, same tactics. My video hit 15,000 views. A woman whose black boyfriend had been driven out by Carol's campaign reached out. She provided screenshots showing identical harassment tactics. Carol wasn't an anomaly. She was a symptom of a deeper, systemic racism. Dad lost his biggest client. Mom blamed me, not our own actions. Carol suggested a lawyer for a defamation suit against me. She had someone in mind who specialized in protecting family reputations. Sister took a bus to Chicago, alone. She waited outside the youth center for 3 hours. Security footage showed Jerome spotting her and leaving through the back exit. He didn't look back. Carol's husband filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Carol kept the house, the alimony, and her surveillance network. I approached a local journalist. Suburban racism wasn't news, it was Tuesday. Sister wrote Jerome a letter explaining everything our family's racism, Carol's orchestration, her own regrets. She sent it through Ray. His response? A photo of ashes. Jerome had burned it without reading. Knowing wouldn't change anything. Let him heal. Our parents backed up and moved to a small apartment on the wrong side of town. They fell from the heights of suburban respectability to the depths they once scorned. Carol faced misdemeanor charges for blackmail and fraud. House arrest at her mansion, including HOA duties. She continued wielding power through proxies. Crystal testified in a civil suit, revealing decades of psychological abuse. Carol's own words, her community protection rhetoric, became evidence against her. The jury awarded damages, but most of Carol's assets were shielded in trusts. Finally, Jerome's lawyer established a college fund for his son Jerome JRB, a child born of love that survived hate. 5 years later, sister named their son Jerome JRB after his father. She raised him alone and told him, "Your father was the bravest man who loved us enough to walk away." Mom and dad worked odd jobs who once wielded influence, now scrubbing floors for the very families they once judged. Carol ran a network, spanning 12 states. I wrote a small press book on suburban racism. Not a bestseller, just a record. Sometimes love survives everything except systems designed to destroy it. We proved that completely. Thanks for reading this. It really made me think about how quickly we judge people and how many good things we miss when we do. My uncle left his entire fortune to whoever could solve his riddle, so our family turned savage. Uncle Garrett was the black sheep who'd made millions in tech before anyone knew what cryptocurrency was. While the rest of us scraped by, working, dead in jobs and maxing out credit cards, he lived in a sprawling mansion with 7 bedrooms, a wine cellar worth more than most people's houses, and a garage full of cars that cost more than my annual salary when he died suddenly at 52 from a heart attack. We all secretly expected his fortune to go to some obscure charity, his final middle finger to the family who treated him like a pariah for decades. Instead, his lawyer called us all to his office and read the strangest will any of us had ever heard. To my greedy relatives who only called when they needed money or wanted to complain about their pathetic lives, I'm giving you one chance to prove you're worth more than the sum of your failures. Solve my riddle. Claim everything I've built. Fail. And it all burns in a magnificent bonfire while you watch from the street. The riddle was printed on expensive letterhead, sealed in individual envelopes for each family member. Where shadows dance but cast no light. Where silence screams throughout the night. Where memory lives but time stands still. Find the key to my last will. At first, we actually worked together like a real family. My Aunt Patricia suggested his old photography darkroom, where he'd spent countless hours developing pictures. Cousin Dylan thought it meant his study, where he'd sit for hours in complete darkness typing away on his computer. Mom was convinced it referenced the basement wine cellar, where he stored bottles worth thousands of dollars each. My brother Finn thought it meant the attic, where old furniture gathered dust under white sheets. For 3 weeks, We tore through every inch of his mansion like a pack of wild animals. We moved furniture that hadn't been touched in years, checked behind expensive paintings for hidden safes, pulled up Persian rugs, and pried at floorboards until our fingers bled. We searched crawl spaces, examined every book in his library for hollow compartments, and even had his pool drained to check for underwater hiding spots. Nothing, not a single clue. That's when the family bonds started snapping like overstretched rubber bands. Patricia hired a private investigator who charged $800 a day. Dylan bribed the longtime housekeeper with a $1,000 tip for information about Garrett's daily habits and secret hiding places. Mom started showing up at the mansion at 5 in the morning to search rooms before anyone else arrived, claiming she needed the quiet to think clearly. Finn installed hidden cameras throughout the house to spy on the rest of us, monitoring our movements like we were common criminals. The real ugliness began when Patricia found something she wasn't supposed to find. She was searching Garrett's master bedroom for the 100th time when she discovered a loose floorboard hidden under his massive antique bed. Beneath it was a metal lockbox containing old photographs and what appeared to be a second riddle written in Garrett's distinctive handwriting. But instead of calling the rest of us immediately, as we'd all agreed to do, she slipped it into her designer purse and pretended she'd found nothing. Unfortunately for Patricia, Finn's surveillance cameras cut everything in perfect high-definition detail. The next morning, he confronted her in front of the whole family gathered in Garrett's kitchen. "Give it back, right now," Mom demanded, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "I found it fair and square," Patricia shot back. "Possession is 9/10 of the law." That's when Dylan completely lost control. He grabbed her $1,000 purse and dumped everything onto the marble kitchen floor. The metal box crashed open with a sound like breaking bones, scattering photographs and papers everywhere. There were ancient Polaroids of places I didn't immediately recognize, a tarnished key that looked like it belonged to something important, and a handwritten note that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. "Only one of you actually deserves this fortune. The rest of you deserve what's coming to you." The note wasn't signed, but I recognized Garrett's handwriting immediately. The same careful script we'd seen on birthday cards that always came with crisp $100 bills, his way of buying our temporary affection without actually investing time in building real relationships with any of us. The scattered photographs showed places from our shared childhood that I hadn't thought about in years. The old family lake house where we'd spent summers before Grandpa died and left it to rot. Garrett's first dingy apartment above the pizza shop where he'd lived while teaching himself computer programming. The sketchy carnival where he'd worked summers during high school, operating the tilt-a-whirl for drunk teenagers and saving every penny for college. But one particular photograph made Patricia gasp so loudly that we all turned to stare at her. It showed the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town where our grandfather used to take us kids to play elaborate games of hide and seek. "He wouldn't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Wouldn't what?" Finn demanded, grabbing the photo from her trembling hands. Patricia looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Grandpa used to tell us horror stories in that warehouse during thunderstorms. Garrett was absolutely terrified of the place after what happened there. He swore on our mother's grave that he'd never set foot in that building again." Dylan picked up the tarnished key from the floor, turning it over in his callous hands and examining the scratches along its surface. "This isn't for any safety deposit box I've ever seen. Look at these wear marks. This key has been used recently and often." The warehouse was exactly 43 minutes outside town, according to my GPS, sitting on 15 acres of worthless swampland that had been in our family for 3 generations. We'd all crammed into Finn's oversized SUV like we were kids again, but the tension was so thick I could barely breathe. Nobody spoke during the entire drive except to give directions, but I caught Mom constantly checking her phone, probably texting her latest boyfriend, Randy, about the potential inheritance and what it would mean for their upcoming wedding. When we finally arrived, the warehouse looked exactly like I remembered from childhood visits, rusted metal siding that had turned orange-brown from decades of weather, broken windows that had never been repaired, and that distinctive smell of decay and stagnant water that seemed to cling to everything within a quarter-mile radius. The only thing different was the heavy-duty padlock on the front door, which looked expensive and recently installed. Dylan's key fit the lock perfectly, turning with a satisfying click that echoed across the empty parking lot. Inside, our flashlights revealed something that should have been impossible. The warehouse had been completely renovated from top to bottom. The concrete floors were spotless and painted a clean white. The walls had been insulated and covered with fresh drywall. Professional lighting fixtures hung from the exposed ceiling beams. And there, positioned in the exact center of the cavernous space, sat an antique wooden table with 5 chairs arranged in a perfect circle. On each chair sat a manila envelope with our names written in Garrett's careful handwriting. "This is absolutely insane," Finn muttered under his breath, but he was already walking toward his designated chair like he was hypnotized. "My envelope contained another riddle," I said, but this one felt different, more personal and menacing. It read, "Before you stands your final test. One truth will put your greed to rest. Choose wisely what you value most, or join me as a warning ghost." Beneath the riddle was a typed confession that made my stomach turn and my hands shake so violently I could barely hold the paper steady. When we were kids, maybe 15 years ago, Garrett had been watching us play an elaborate game of hide and seek in this exact warehouse when a section of the rotted floor suddenly collapsed without warning. Dylan, who was only 8 at the time, had fallen through the hole and landed hard on a pile of rusted machinery in the basement. His leg was broken so badly that jagged bone pierced through the skin, and blood was pooling around him at an alarming rate. The rest of us kids panicked and ran screaming for the adults. But Garrett, who was 13 and already bigger than most teenagers, stayed behind and climbed down into that dark basement. He used his favorite shirt to create a tourniquet, applying pressure to the wound and talking calmly to Dylan to keep him conscious until the paramedics arrived 20 minutes later. According to the emergency room doctor, Dylan would have bled to death without immediate intervention, but that's not the story our family told for the past 15 years. Patricia, who was 14 at the time and already showing signs of the jealousy and manipulation that would define her adult personality, convinced our parents and everyone else that Garrett had actually caused the accident. She claimed he'd been daring Dylan to jump across the weak section of floor, egging him on and calling him a coward when he hesitated. She'd been furious that summer because Garrett always got the most attention from the adults. He was smart, funny, and charming in a way that made everyone gravitate toward him at family gatherings. Patricia had always been average at everything: average grades, average looks, average personality, and she couldn't stand being overshadowed by her younger cousin.